Okay, hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Happy Easter, everybody. So I thought we'd talk about Easter and maybe take a look at the deeper meanings of it. And what did I make the title of this podcast? Ancient Secrets of Easter Revealed. You know, it kind of interests me because I think pretty much every religion, well, like Punna Prasad said, he said, 1 in a million people really want deep knowledge, and I guess that's fine. People go to the church on Sunday or whatever and wear the cross or, go to the temple or what have you. But I thought what we do today is really take a deeper look at, what is the cross about, and who was Jesus, and what about the resurrection and all of that. And I think, I don't know, I find it extremely interesting. I've lived in the mountains of western North. I'm from Ohio originally. That's where I was born and raised. But then ever since high school, my parents moved to Florida when I was in high school. And I just traveled around. I lived in different parts of the world, different countries, and also certainly all over the United States. But for the past around 20 years, the mountains of western North Carolina have been my home. And I've had the opportunity of speaking with a number of different, I can count just off the top of my head, 5 different Baptist ministers. And I've been very impressed. One of the Baptist ministers, in fact, I was in California flying back home through Atlanta. Just coincidence, he ended up sitting right next to me on the plane. And we talked for the whole flight, 5 hours or whatever. And he picked my brain. He was really interested in my perspectives and what I had to say about everything, all the different aspects of religion, and he loved it. After we got off the plane, it was almost like neither one of us really wanted to get off the plane, He shook my hand and thanked me. And he was a minister in, I think it was Georgia, some small town in Georgia. And then there was another time when I was building my house in Nashville. So this goes back 20 years now. Gee. I was living in San Diego at the time, and I flew back here to check on the progress of my house. I had purchased a lot and met with the builder, and then I went back to San Diego where I was living. So I came back, and at that point they had already dug the basement, and there was a guy laying the cement block and on the foundation in the basement. So it was just the very beginnings of the construction. And so I saw him there, and I walked up and I said, oh, hi. I said, I'm the owner. And he looked at me. He said, so you're the owner? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I got a question for you. He said, I want to know what's going on here. And I said, you mean in Asheville? And he said, no, here. And I said, well, you mean Elk Mountain, which is where the house was? And he said, no, here. I said, you mean this house? And he said, yes. Well, it turns out that, we were building a Vastu home. So the geometry was such, and it was lined with cardinal directions and all that. And so then he said, I just have one question. He says, I want to know if you believe that Jesus Christ is the only way. And he was pretty critical. It turns out he was a Baptist minister, And I said, if you mean Jesus as just a physical body, a chunk of flesh, I said, no, I don't believe that. But if you mean Jesus as the Christ, and if you mean that there's one thing that's the source of everything, and there's no other way because it's the only essence there is, And Jesus knew he was that. He was, how would you say it, integrated or established enough in the self, or such a total manifestation of that divinity that he knew he was the Christ. And if that's what you mean, I said, absolutely. There's only one, and he knew he was it. So the conversation went on like that. And I also said, that because I believe that people could have gone to heaven or getting enlightened or whatever you want to call it before Jesus, the physical body, was born. And I just can't believe that nobody ever went to heaven until after he was born in a physical body. And it made sense to him, and he loved it. So we had a long conversation about spirituality. And at the end of the conversation, he said, I have a church in the valley down in the Asheville area. He said, I'd like you to come and speak, which I was impressed, And so there's been 5, the other 3 I can think of were shorter conversations, but they were still, wonderful. And I realized these Baptist ministers, at least in my experience, they are deep thinkers, And so admittedly, when we start talking about Easter from the perspective of the ancient secrets and stuff, it can be a little bit of a slippery slope, because people are kind of maybe vested in a perspective. And so I want to be sure that what I say here is heard in the proper context. And maybe the best way to do that is to talk about the conversations I've already had with some of the Baptist ministers, Because, for example, Jesus as the embodiment of the Christ. Well, what is the Christ? Well, in Vedic terminology, in Sanskrit, the word is Chaitanya. Chaitanya means the one underlying essence, that one thing that is beyond thingness. And there are quotes from the Bible that give a feeling for that, like I am that I am. It's beyond thingness, no thingness. There are other Bible quotes like that sort of allude to that notion. So there's correlations there. Oh, and then the other thing too that I find interesting is the cross. You see a lot of people wearing a cross. I think it's great. And I remember there's this one guy who was working for me, and he had this big cross he was wearing around his neck. And he was Mexican and could hardly speak English. But when I saw it, he said, "Oh," I said, "that's very good." And I could tell he was kind of taken aback. Oh, really? Because I guess because he sees a Vedic temple, and so he feels like, oh, that's a different belief or different whatever. But it's not, What is the cross? Okay, from a Vedic perspective, you have everything meeting at a point, these two, and then like this, and it all meets at a point. Well, that point in the Vedic tradition, it's called the Bindu point. And the idea is that Chaitanya, the Christ, the absolute, is finer than the finest. It goes all the way to just a point value. And you can come from any direction, but ultimately, that is the only way. That is the only place where it all goes. All of nature is gravitating back to that one point. So they say it's smaller than the smallest. It's also bigger than the biggest, you see? So that's the idea of the cross. Now, it also gets interesting, like this whole idea of the Holy Communion, or Adrian, like at the Last Supper, right? Isn't that Christ said, this is my flesh, this is my blood, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what is that about? I mean, so from a superficial perspective, I don't know. For me, it wasn't enough. I mean, what the heck does that mean? You know? But I've talked to you on these podcasts before about the principle of mapping. Things map. And mapping, there's a technology to it. There's a reality to it. I talk about how the foot maps onto the whole body. The big toe is the head, the heel is the pelvis, that kind of idea. And so similarly, we can create mappings, and different mappings have different amounts of correspondence. Like everything is a unified field. Everything is Chaitanya. So, you know, I am that, thou art that, all of this is nothing but that. You and I are one. I am that coffee cup sitting over there. But mappings can gain in energy. They can gain in power. And depending on the degree of attention. I remember when I was a little kid at the World's Fair, they had the Pietà, Michelangelo's Pietà, you know, and you'd be on a conveyor belt going by and you could look at the Pietà. And I have to say, I mean, it has an impact. It's got some Shakti, some energy. There's a mapping there. You know, that's Christ and his mother, you know. Now, where did the energy from that come from? Well, for one, it's just beautifully done, obviously, but also the attention of people. For how many years, you know, hundreds of years, people looking at that and being inspired by it and enlivening, you see that mapping. And so it gains Shakti, it gains energy, it gains power. Just like the Holy Communion, you know, when people take Holy Communion, look at all the energy and all the power, all the attention that's been given to that, starting right with the Last Supper, you know. And so there becomes a very energetic reality to it. It becomes, you know, real in that sense. And so mappings have power, you see. We'll talk more about mappings here in a little bit. For example, well, let's go ahead and do it right now. Jesus's life, his whole life. Boy, there's so much here. I'll get it all out. I'm getting excited here, but I'll get it all out before the end of the podcast. But Jesus's life, if you can look at it as a manifestation of the whole mechanic of creation, his whole life was like that. There's a word in Sanskrit, in the Veda, it's called yajna. Yajna is, we could say it's like action in support of nature, action in an evolutionary direction. Now, in the most expanded sense of the word, or maybe the most limited, I don't know, in one sense of the word, everything is a yajna, because everything is moving, gravitating back to Chaitanya, back to God, back to the Christ, however you want to say it. But there are different technologies and different ways that actually they're ceremonies, and they look like ceremonies. You know, you have the pundit there, and he's doing different things with incense, camphor, you know, rice, what have you. And it's a very prescribed thing with Vedic chants. And I've already talked about how Sanskrit, the language of Sanskrit is cognized right out of Chaitanya, right out of the Absolute. And so those words have power. And so therefore, these ceremonies, which are prescribed by Vedic cognition, they're not just made up, they're structured within the underlying essence of existence itself. And so those yajnas have power, and they can have different purposes. I mean, geez, you can have yajnas to enliven your relationship with different aspects of God, for example. One yajna for this aspect, another yajna for that aspect. But now let's get back to Christ's life. They say that, you see, all of life can be looked at as a yajna, but as a person becomes more evolved, as a person embodies more and more of that Christ value, then the technology becomes more powerful. They're functioning more and more in harmony with the laws of nature. And the more in harmony you are with nature, the more power, the more Shakti, you would say, you have, and you're living, and you're radiating to life. So now take a guy like Jesus, who knew he was the Christ, and not just intellectually, not just emotionally, but it was actually a physiological embodiment of that value. So his whole life was a yajna. And what, well, I guess, I don't know, Adrian, you know more about it than me, but I think some people might say that what was the purpose of his life? Well, to die for our sins. Now, without an understanding of yajna and Vedic technology and all that, that sounds like, what are you talking about? He died for our sins. It makes zero sense. And it's like, maybe he died because of our sins, because there were a bunch of sinful people. And here he is, this great guy. And what do? They crucify him. But there's a whole deeper understanding, which is that his whole life was a yajna for humanity, if you will, for all of life. And the story of his life then is the story of the whole manifestation of existence, the whole nature of existence. And we can even look at the idea of this virgin birth. That's another thing that probably so many people are like, oh, brother, come on, I'm not buying that. It's ridiculous, But it's funny because a lot of those same people will watch a science fiction movie about somebody who comes down from another planet and with a stroke of his hand, impregnates some woman with some great being or something, The point being that, like Einstein said, Albert Einstein, I like this quote. He said, there are only two ways to look at life. One is like everything is a miracle. And the other is like nothing is a miracle. Point being that there is a mastery over the laws of nature. It's a field, we say, of all possibilities. Now, I've talked a lot about paradigm identity. And the problem then, I'll tell you, the biggest limitation of human life, if there's a, I don't want to use the word curse, it's too strong, but if there's a problem with human life, it's that our paradigm identities are so strong. Paradigms are great tools, but they're lousy masters. And people become possessed by a paradigm with which they've been indoctrinated into, with which they've become identified with. And you see it on all levels of life. Scientists even, I was a physics and math major. My whole family background, science, I'm a veterinarian by training. So science is a great paradigm, but it's a lousy master like all paradigms. And so if you get so indoctrinated in any paradigm, even science, then you start to cease to really embrace the idea that it's a field of all possibilities. And so then the idea of something coming out of nothing, if you will, a child being born without the fertilization of an egg, you just can't accept it. But it's such a beautiful, again, his whole life was a story of the manifestation of existence. What do they say? It all came out of no thingness. It all came out of pure isness. It all came out of pure consciousness. It is beyond thingness. And so, perfect, virgin birth, that kind of idea. And now the problem with saying that is all of a sudden, half the people who hear, why? Because it's not part of their paradigm identity. Paradigm identities are strong. When Galileo suggested that the earth was round, People couldn't buy it. They even imprisoned them. Did they put them to death? I don't know. But I'm quite sure they imprisoned them at least. And why? Because the paradigm identity is so intense. And of course, they didn't think they had limited notions and paradigm identity. They thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they had knowledge. Just like us today, it just doesn't stop. We all have paradigms that we're identified with, and we have a hard time seeing past them. And we even have a hard time taking a look at them, because we can find it offensive or threatening, So at any rate, okay, birth of Christ, virgin birth. Incidentally, let's say you just can't buy that. It just doesn't make any sense. Not possible. Christ by his teachings. And his teachings are great. It's too bad we don't have more of them. It's too bad that nobody really wrote down his stuff. I don't think until a couple hundred years after he died that they really start writing down his story. I mean, you go to a lecture of a professor and you walk out and try to repeat what he said, you don't get it right. But nevertheless, what we do have, what was said, what we do have is a clear indication that this guy was the real deal, And so then it becomes very interesting because what happens? He goes out and he teaches, he gives knowledge. And so what happens? They crucify him. Well, that's the nature of relativity too, isn't it? Positive attracts negative. It's the whole story of good and evil, Once you get into relativity, you're in that which is relative. And so, the people that crucified Christ weren't like, oh, we're the bad guys, and so we're going to crucify Christ. No, they thought they were the good guys. Why? Paradigm identity. So paradigm identity becomes almost like the nemesis to divinity. Paradigms are good. Using paradigms are great. So when paradigms start to use you, that we get in trouble. And if you look at politics, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, paradigm identity is everywhere, and the perspectives can have value. But when we get so lost to a perspective that we can't see past it, then we get into trouble, And so then, then there's the crucifixion of Christ, and then the resurrection. Okay, that's another one a lot of people have a hard time with. The resurrection, are you kidding me? Paradigm identity, and also, if you just read the cognitions, if you just study Vedic cognitions, I mean, sadly, even like Panditji said, he and I were talking once, and he just kind of made the comment, he said, people don't believe any of this stuff, But, for example, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he talks about different supernatural. They're not really supernatural, are they? Supernatural mean beyond nature. They're laws of nature. They're inherent in nature, but they appear to be supernatural from the perspective of our limited paradigm identities. And there's so much evidence that we know so little compared to what's out there. I was even watching something on YouTube the other day about 25 ancient sites, I don't know, like Machu Picchu and the pyramids in Egypt and temples in India and Mexico, Central America and stuff. And they don't know how they did it. And then the whole thing with Darwin, statistical studies show that that's not the whole story. I explain what the missing component to Darwin's theory is in one of my podcasts. But what happens is they turn a blind eye to it, really. Why? Because it's not part of their paradigm identity. Even modern physicists who come up with these Big Bang theories and things, and I'm not saying the Big Bang is wrong, but they don't have it right. Because according to their theories, they looked out through the Hubble telescope and they see galaxies out there that are older than they say the universe is. So our paradigm identities limit us. And it's not that we become no holds barred, anything goes, okay, I believe everything. No, but it's that we have the flexibility within our own awareness to look beyond the current limitations that are imposed upon us by the paradigms with which we've been indoctrinated into. But to me, okay, let's take a deeper look at Christianity. Let's take a deeper look at the cross. What does it mean? What, and the Bindu point, and how could it possibly be that anybody, even if he is the incarnation of the Christ spirit, how could it possibly be that there could be resurrection, there could be virgin birth, there could be all sorts of what we call miracles? And again, like Einstein said, either everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. But he is what is referred to as the master, right? The master of what? The master of all the laws of nature, the field of infinite possibilities. You see, to me, it's got to make sense. And the beauty is that it does make sense. It makes sense. And when you make sense of it, we have two hemispheres of the brain, the right half and the left half. So there's a feeling level. And yeah, we wear the cross and it's beautiful and it feels so wonderful. And we just feel like, what are we feeling there? Deep inside, we know who and what we really are, which is one with God, if you will. We are that one source of everything. That's a source of us, and we can sense it. It may not be a really clear intellectual understanding. It may not be a really definite thing, but we sense it. I mean, for goodness sake, even an earthworm senses that there's something precious within. It's like when the sun comes out, it'll burrow back down in the dampness of the earth to stay alive, to protect that soul, that essence, you see? And so it's that feeling, that emotional feeling, if you will, of just the preciousness of our own inner divinity that has inspired in the past people to build huge temples and things, and they don't really even have an intellectual understanding of it, but that feeling is so strong. Now combine that with the other hemisphere of the brain, an intellectual understanding, reason. What is reason? Reason is the integration between thoughts and feelings. Things become reasonable. And as you become more refined in your ability to reason, then those fine feelings become reasonable, and you're able to reason and discard feelings maybe based on emotional bias or hurts or whatever. We're able to discern the path of evolution, discernment, Adi Shankara, and you're able to discern, and then it comes out as a concrete thought, and then you have understanding of life. And that's really what it's all about. Christ was resurrected. What does that mean? That means you can't kill it. That means that it's the whole process of relativity, from the manifestation from no thingness to the field of duality and relativity, and then negative attracts positive, and the whole thing goes through a melodrama. But ultimately, what are you left with? The Christ. It's still there. It doesn't go away. I think that's about all I have to say. Adrian or Scott, do either of you guys have anything to add?
No, happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I know, Adrian, before you heard my lectures and stuff, you came from a very Christian background, very religious background, and then you were saying that you studied comparative religion in college,
Yeah.
in the university. And I remember the first day you came to one of my lectures. You weren't even enrolled in the class, but you drove somebody from Phoenix to San Diego where the class was.
That's right.
I remember that morning, and you walked in, and I don't know, you just asked me if it was okay if you just sat in for a little bit, even though you weren't enrolled. I said, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
Why not, and then that was it,
That was it.
Yeah.
It's like pieces of my internal universe came together. I mean, sounds dramatic, but I really, I'd been searching for God my whole life. And I literally took every course in the university that I could, searching. And I thought about being a Greek and Hebrew scholar so I could read it for myself, because I felt like it wasn't the whole picture. There was something more somehow. And then
Live in a rational age. Value of into words. And it's not just about Jesus, it's about everything. It's about, you haven't really found it within yourself yet. So all the secret doctrines that are out there, they're secret because even after people read them, the real meaning, the real essence, yeah, it points in a direction for sure. And there's a value to that. But the deepest meaning of it remains a secret, you know? When the mind, the left and right hemispheres of the brain become fully integrated with Chaitanya, the depth of your being, when all that becomes integrated with everything else, then the ancient secrets are fully revealed, and not before, you know. All right, I guess that's it. If there's nothing else, happy Easter, everybody, and we will talk to you again next time on Ancient Secrets Revealed. That's all for now.